wind never slept in the Dakota Plains. It moaned through broken fences, whistled through hollow skulls of cattle long forgotten, and carried stories nobody dared to tell twice. That night, under a bruised sky, the midnight train to Deadwood Gulch screamed through the darkness like a dying beast. The wheels shrieked on the tracks, sparks flashing in rhythm with the lightning that tore the heavens apart. They said that if you stood close enough to those rails, you'd hear the echo of Silver Spurs, the kind that belonged to a man long dead, a rider who never got off his horse. The train's lanterns flickered weakly against the storm. Inside, the few passengers clung to their silence like a prayer. Rodney Jenkins, a grizzled bounty hunter with eyes like worn gunmetal, sat near the rear. He carried a single bag and a coffin ticket, prepaid by someone who didn't sign their name. Across from him sat Maggie Boone, a saloon singer wrapped in a faded red shawl. Her face was painted soft, but her eyes were sharp enough to gut a liar. She held a locket and kept staring out the window, the name Samuel every few minutes, like a ghost she couldn't bury. 2 seats down was Phil Baldwin, a railroad man, round-bellied, nervous, and reeking of tobacco. He kept checking his pocket watch every few seconds. We ain't supposed to be running this line tonight. At the far end of the car sat Brad Monroe, the deputy marshal from Rapid City. Young, proud, and wearing a tin star that hadn't yet seen much blood. He eyed Rodney the way a dog eyes a wolf. At exactly 11:57 p.m., the train slowed near the Black Hills Pass. Rain slapped against the glass like angry knuckles. Then the lights went out. The train howled into darkness, and through that suffocating silence came the faintest chime. Metal against metal. Chink, chink, chink. Slow, deliberate, like spurs brushing wood. Phil Baldwin froze mid-breath. "You hear that?" Rodney lifted his head. "Yeah, and it ain't from inside this car." The train gave a jolt, and suddenly the conductor's voice crackled through the speaker. Except the words were twisted, drowned in static. Only 3 came through clear. "He's back, riding." The car lurched again, harder this time. Maggie's locket fell to the floor. Rodney picked it up, but when he straightened, Maggie was gone. Not moved, not fled, just gone. As if the air had swallowed her whole. Her shawl lay draped across the empty seat. Phil began to panic, clawing at the door handle. "We gotta stop this damn thing." Rodney grabbed his arm. "Sit still, Baldwin. Nobody stops a train that's already dead." Outside, lightning split the horizon, and in that flash, every passenger who dared look out saw it. A rider galloping alongside the train, cloak billowing like smoke, hat low over his face, and spurs flashing silver with every stride. He wasn't touching the ground, he rode the storm. Then the whistle blew again, a sound so deep it felt like the earth itself howling back. Brad Monroe drew his revolver and said in a trembling whisper, whispering, "Who the hell is that?" Rodney Jenkins just stared through the rain-streaked window. "That," he said, voice low and cold, "ain't a who. That's a what." And the train to Deadwood Gulch rolled deeper into the dark. The train thundered forward through sheets of rain, the whistle shrieking like a wounded animal that knew it was running out of track. No one spoke for nearly 10 minutes after Maggie Boone vanished. Not one breath above a whisper. Just the groaning of metal and the slow, haunting rhythm of Silver Spurs outside the window. Chink, chink, chink. Rodney Jenkins kept his eyes fixed on the dark beyond the glass. His reflection stared back at him, tired, hollow, and wet with the kind of fear he thought he'd buried a decade ago in Texas. Phil Baldwin broke first. "She was right there, Jenkins. You saw her. She didn't move. She didn't scream." Rodney cut him off. "Then she didn't walk away." Brad Monroe, still gripping his revolver, was pacing the aisle. "This is a trick. Has to be. Some outlaw jumped the train. Maybe that rider outside's the one taking folks." Rodney gave a humorless chuckle. "You think a man on horseback can keep up with a train in full storm? Not unless he's riding something else." Brad stopped pacing. "What's that supposed to mean?" Rodney's gaze didn't leave the window. "It means I seen that rider before. 15 years ago. Thought he was dead then, too." Lightning lit the cabin, and in that brief flash, Rodney's eyes looked ancient, like he'd been keeping this secret since the war. Phil wiped sweat from his face. "You're talking nonsense, Jenkins. There ain't no such thing as ghosts." "Tell that to Maggie Boone," Rodney muttered. Brad was about to argue when the train screeched, a violent metallic scream that threw everyone sideways. Luggage fell, the lights flickered red, then went black again. Outside, something had hit the rail car. Hard. Rodney steadied himself, grabbed his rifle, and headed for the door. "Stay behind me." They stepped into the next car, the mail carriage. The smell hit them first, copper and smoke. A lantern swayed from the ceiling, casting wild shadows over the blood-splattered floor. The mail sacks were torn open, letters scattered like feathers, and in the center, pinned to the wall with a railway spike through his throat, hung the conductor. Phil staggered back, covering his mouth. Brad's revolver shook in his hand. Carved into the wood beside the corpse with something sharp and deliberate were the words, "He rides for the unpaid." Rodney crouched beside the body. The man's eyes were open, frozen wide, pupils glassy. His hat lay on the floor, soaked in crimson. "What does it mean?" Rodney looked up slowly. "It means this ain't random." He pulled a folded telegram from the conductor's pocket. The ink had run from the rain, but one line was still legible. "Deliver, Monroe, Jenkins, Baldwin, and Boone. Last call to Deadwood." Phil's lips trembled. "That's us. Those are our names." Brad stepped back, face pale. "Someone set us up." Rodney's jaw tightened. "No. Someone's calling us in." Outside, the wind began to shift, carrying a new sound through the steel and rain. A hum. Deep, mechanical, and almost human. Brad aimed his gun toward the window, but before he could blink, the lantern flickered and went out completely. Then came the echo. Slow, deliberate, closer now. Chink, chink, chink. Rodney cocked his rifle. He's boarding the train. The next flash of lightning revealed the impossible. A hand pressed against the window from outside, fingers bone-white, nails blackened by soot. Steam rose from where it touched the glass as if the flesh burned at its own touch. The hand withdrew, leaving behind the faint imprint of a spurred boot print in the condensation. Rodney backed toward the exit. "We're leaving this car. Now." They pushed through the corridor into the next cabin, the luxury car. Empty. Curtains drawn. A single poker table still had cards laid out, as though the players had just stood up mid-hand. The ace of spades sat atop the pile, streaked with blood. Phil whispered shakily, "We should have never taken this train. I told him this line was shut down years ago, after the miners' riot." Rodney froze. "What riot?" Phil swallowed hard. "Deadwood Line 10. A crew got buried alive in a cave-in. They said the company never paid the widows. The miners cursed the rails before they died." Rodney turned, voice like gravel. "And one of those miners? Did he wear Silver Spurs?" Phil's eyes widened. "Yeah, a foreman named Silas Boone." Rodney went pale. Maggie Boone's husband. And right then, the whistle blew again. Not from the front of the train, but from somewhere deep within it. A hollow, inhuman cry that didn't echo in the air, but inside their skulls. Rodney whispered, "He's come for his debt." The lantern reignited on its own, flickering violently, and behind them, the poker cards lifted into the air, spinning like leaves in a storm before falling face up. 4 dead men's hands. 1 for each of them still alive. The train had gone quiet. Not the kind of quiet that brings peace, the kind that smothers sound, where even your heartbeat feels too loud. Rodney Jenkins, Brad Monroe, and Phil Baldwin stood frozen in the luxury car, staring at the floating poker cards that had just settled back to the table. Each card, an omen. Each man, a target. The storm outside clawed at the windows, lightning flashing just long enough to paint shadows that didn't belong to the living. Brad spoke first, voice trembling. "We can't stay here. We need to get to the engine. Stop the train." Phil shook his head violently. "No, you don't understand, boy. There ain't no engineer up there. We're running blind." Rodney glanced toward the corridor. "We'll find out." He reloaded his rifle and moved forward, boots thudding softly on the wooden floor. Every sound echoed like a warning. The next car ahead, the dining carriage, smelled faintly of coffee and old cigar smoke. Rodney pushed the door open. The room looked untouched, tables neatly set, curtains drawn tight. But the smell was wrong. Underneath the scent of tobacco was something foul, something that smelled like burnt iron. Brad whispered, "It's empty." Rodney lifted his rifle and stepped forward. His eyes caught a strange reflection in the silver serving tray on the counter. Two glowing points behind him, like twin lanterns. He spun around. Nothing there. Then the window glass shivered, and a tall figure stepped through it, as if the storm itself had been peeled open. Hat low, coat black as tar, spurs catching the faint lamplight, silver, glimmering, dripping. The Ghost Rider stood in the doorway. Rodney froze. Brad aimed his gun, but his hand trembled too hard to shoot. Phil collapsed into a chair, mumbling prayers that got lost in the thunder. The rider's face wasn't flesh, it was bone and ember. Where eyes should have been were twin silver orbs reflecting every terrified breath in the room. His voice came like wind over gravel. "Where's the sheriff who buried us?" Rodney's grip tightened on his rifle. "You got the wrong men, stranger." The rider tilted his head. "Do I?" He reached out a gloved hand, the leather hissing like hot coal. When his finger brushed the tablecloth, it caught fire without smoke. Brad stumbled back, firing once. The bullet passed through the rider's chest and hit the wall behind him. The ghost didn't flinch. He stepped forward, his boots leaving black scorch marks on the floor. Rodney shouted, "Run!" Brad and Phil dashed toward the rear, slamming the door behind them. Rodney stayed, heart pounding like a war drum. The rider stopped inches from him. "You were there," he whispered. "You watched them die in the mines. You took your bounty and left us for dust." Rodney's voice broke. "I didn't know they were still down there. I thought—" "Don't lie to the dead, Jenkins." The lantern flickered wildly. For a moment, Rodney saw it all. The mine collapsing, the screaming men, the smoke filling the tunnels, and his own younger self running out with gold in his arms. He dropped to his knees. "I was ordered to. The company told me to seal the shaft." The rider leaned close, his silver eyes glowing brighter. "Then seal it now, from the other side." The lights burst. Brad and Phil, waiting in the next car, heard a rifle shot, then silence. When they opened the door again, the room was empty. Only the faint smell of gunpowder, and on the table, a single sheriff's badge, half melted, marked with the name Rodney Jenkins. Brad whispered, "He's gone." Phil's lips quivered. "Gone where?" The train gave a sudden jolt, the lights flickered, and then, faintly, from somewhere above the roof, came the echo of boots walking across the metal. Chink, chink, chink. Phil covered his ears. "He's coming back for us." Brad reloaded, trying to steady his hands. "Then we make our stand." But as he said it, the train's interior lights dimmed again, this time revealing something scrawled in soot across the glass window beside them. "Two debts remain." Phil's breath came ragged. "We need to jump off, now!" Brad looked out the window. The world outside was black. No stations, no stars, just endless plains and twisted lightning. The train wasn't following any track he knew. Phil shouted, "We're not heading to Deadwood anymore. We're heading underground." And that's when they both saw it. Ahead, through the fogged glass of the next car, a faint orange glow, like the mouth of a furnace waiting to swallow them whole. Brad whispered, "That ain't light. That's fire." The whistle howled again, louder than before, and through the thunder, the Ghost Rider's voice rolled like distant thunder. "Next stop, payment due." The air inside the train thickened. until it felt like breathing through smoke. Brad Monroe wiped the sweat from his brow, staring through the window as the world outside blurred into a flickering orange haze. It wasn't dawn they were approaching. It was something else, something burning beneath the earth. Phil Baldwin sat across from him, face white as chalk. His hands shook around the half-empty whiskey flask he'd found under the seat. This cursed line was shut down for a reason, he whispered. I told him the tunnels weren't safe. I told him the dead would come for it, Brad snapped. What the hell are you talking about? Phil looked up, eyes wet. I was the engineer on that collapse, boy. The Boone mine disaster. I was there. Silas Boone begged us not to go deeper, said the ground was hollow, but I signed the order anyway. The company wanted gold faster. We drilled until the walls screamed. The train rattled violently. A low, grinding moan filled the air, the sound of metal folding somewhere ahead. Brad gritted his teeth. You're saying this train, it's taking us back there? Phil nodded slowly. Back where it started. The furnace below, the whistle screamed again, longer this time. A sound like a dying animal trapped in a pit. The lanterns flickered, and the polished floorboards beneath them began to tremble as heat seeped through the wood. Brad felt it. The tracks were no longer steel. The metallic rhythm had changed. It was hollow now, echoing like wagon wheels over skulls. He looked down. Between the floorboards, faint red cracks pulsed like veins. Phil muttered, "We're not on the surface anymore." The next jolt nearly threw them off their seats. Phil's flask rolled away, clinking against something solid, something under the seats. Brad bent down and pulled out a bundle wrapped in cloth. He unwrapped it slowly, and the dim light revealed 4 iron tags, each stamped with a name. Rodney Jenkins, Brad Monroe, Phil Baldwin, Maggie Boone. Brad's stomach turned. What are these? Phil stared at the tags in horror. Grave markers. Before either could react, the car door at the far end opened by itself. No wind, no footsteps, just a hiss, like steam from a boiling pipe. And then came the voice. You all rode once before. Brad raised his revolver. Show yourself. From the haze of the corridor stepped a figure, not the Ghost Rider this time, but a man, human, flesh and bone. He wore a dusty preacher's coat and a black hat pulled low, a silver chain swinging from his neck. I'm Reverend Coulter, he said softly, the one who blessed this train before they ran the last route. The Lord told me not to, but greed. Brad aimed steady. You part of this? The Reverend shook his head. Part of it? Son, I'm trapped, same as you. The conductor made his deal. Now we all ride till the debts are done. Phil croaked. What deal? The Reverend's gaze hardened. Silas Boone's men were buried alive down there. The company swore to pay the widows. They never did. So Boone swore he'd ride again until every man responsible met the same fire he died in. And now, looking at Phil, he's collecting. Brad's revolver shook slightly. Then how do we stop it? The Reverend smiled faintly, a smile too tired to hold hope. You don't. You confess. You pay. The lights flickered again, then went out. For a heartbeat there was silence, then a roar so deep it rattled their teeth. The train plunged downward, literally. The floor tilted, the world outside a spiral of red and black. Brad grabbed the Reverend's arm. We're going underground. Phil screamed as the lanterns shattered, sparks bursting into flames that raced along the floorboards. The wood began to smoke, curling upward into ash. The Reverend fell to his knees, clutching his cross. We're entering Boone's furnace. The heat grew unbearable. Brad's skin prickled, the smell of burning metal filling the air. Then, through the window, they saw it, a tunnel of flame stretching endlessly below, its walls lined with bones. The train barreled straight into it. Phil shouted over the roar, terrified, "We'll burn alive!" But the Reverend shook his head. "No, that's not the fire that kills. That's the fire that remembers." The whistle blew, and from the front of the train the sound of horses echoed again. Chink, 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 chink. The Ghost Rider was on the roof, riding it straight into the mouth of the inferno. Brad clung to the seat as the air turned molten, vision blurring. "What does he want from me?" he gasped. The Reverend looked up, eyes full of sorrow. "You're his blood, boy." Silas Boone's nephew, Brad, froze. "That's impossible." "Your mother was a Boone," annoyed the Reverend hissed. "You carry the family curse." "The debt's in your name," the whistle wailed, a scream of judgment. Brad's vision went white, heat searing his hands as the walls melted into glowing amber. Phil's screams faded behind him. And through the fire, he saw the rider's face again, those silver eyes fixed only on him. "Deadwood waits for you, boy." The train plunged deeper, and everything went black. Brad Monroe woke to silence. The roar of fire was gone. The rumbling train beneath his boots was gone. Even the scream of the whistle, that haunting cry that had followed them into the pit, had faded into a hollow wind. He opened his eyes. He was lying in the middle of a street. Deadwood Gulch, but not the Deadwood he knew. The sky above glowed a sickly amber, like the inside of a forge. The air shimmered with heat, but no sun burned there. The buildings were warped, melted at the edges as if they'd been carved out of memory. Shadows moved behind the windows, not people, but echoes, flickering in and out with each faint gust. Brad rose slowly, revolver still clutched in his blistered hand. His badge, tarnished and half-melted, dangled loosely from his coat. He whispered to himself, "This ain't real." A voice behind him disagreed. "Oh, it's real enough, boy." Brad turned fast. Phil Baldwin stood there, or what was left of him. His skin was ash gray, eyes hollowed, his railroad uniform charred at the seams. Smoke drifted from the edges of his body like from dying coals. Brad staggered back. "Phil? You're dead," Phil said simply, "but not done." The ground trembled under their boots, a long, slow rumble like a drumbeat in the distance. From the far end of the street, a figure emerged, cloaked in black, silver spurs gleaming with every step. The Ghost Rider. Behind him followed a procession, a crowd of miners, their faces caved in, ribs exposed, eyes glowing faint red. They carried picks, shovels, and broken helmets. Phil whispered, "The Boone miners, everyone that died in the collapse." Brad took a step back, revolver shaking. "Stay away!" The rider stopped in the center of the street. The crowd fanned out around him, forming a silent circle. When he spoke, his voice sounded like the train's whistle turned human. "Brad Monroe, blood of Boone, keeper of the stolen breath." Brad nervously swallowed. "I never took nothin' from you." "You took peace," the rider said. "When your uncle's mine buried us alive, the company sealed the shaft. But it was your father's men who took the gold from our graves. Your name was signed to the last deed. Boone blood profited from Boone death." Brad frantically shook his head. "That was before my time. I didn't even know." The rider's hand twitched and chains of molten iron rose from the ground, snaking toward Brad's boots. "Blood remembers even when the living forget." Phil turned to him, pleading eyes pleading. "Confess, Brad. It's the only way. He needs the truth before he'll let go." Brad's heart hammered. "The truth won't bring anyone back." The rider took one slow step closer. "No, but it might stop you from joining them." Brad looked down. The ground beneath him had turned to glass. Beneath that glass, flames churned. He saw faces in it. The conductor, Maggie Boone, Rodney Jenkins, their mouths moving silently, eyes wide and pleading. He dropped to his knees. "All right. I confess, my family took the gold. We knew the tunnels were graves. We dug them anyway." The fire pulsed. The chains loosened slightly. The miners' murmurs grew quieter, almost peaceful. But the rider didn't move. Brad, frustrated, shouted, "I said I confess." The rider tilted his head. "And what of the boy in the mine?" Brad's voice faltered. What boy?" The rider's tone turned cold as ash. Cold as ash. "Silas Boone's son, the only one who made it halfway to the surface. Your father shot him in the back to keep the secret buried. Do you deny it?" Brad's breath caught in his throat. The memory surfaced, something his father had whispered on his deathbed. The sin he never spoke aloud. He couldn't say it. The ground cracked, flames leapt through, wrapping around his legs. Phil tried to reach him, but his ghostly hand passed right through. The rider raised his arm. "Then your silence will speak for you." The fire swallowed Brad up to his waist. He screamed, dropping his gun. The metal hissed as it hit the ground. Phil shouted, "Let him go, he's just a man." The rider's eyes burned brighter. No man rides free on Boone's line. Brad's body convulsed, and then with one final scream, the flames pulled him under. The ground sealed itself, leaving behind only the smell of scorched earth and the echo of a single chink, a silver spur falling loose into the dirt. Phil fell to his knees, sobbing. "Is it over?" The rider turned toward him. "Almost." Phil, trembled. "I confessed. I told the truth. I was the engineer." "Yes," the rider said, lowering his head, "but you profited still. You kept your wages, you built your house on blood." Phil stared in disbelief. "Please, I've suffered enough." The rider's voice softened for the first time. "You'll suffer no more." He placed a burning hand on Phil's head. Smoke rose, and Phil's body turned to ash, scattering into the wind. The miners bowed their heads. The rider looked up toward the strange amber sky. "Only one debt remains." He mounted his spectral horse, black, flaming at the hooves, and rode toward the horizon, leaving behind only the faint echo of spurs and the whisper of judgment. In the dust, the town of Deadwood Gulch began to fade, its buildings crumbling into embers as the wind carried them away. And somewhere in that fading wind, a child's voice whispered, "Daddy, it's time to come home." The rider turned once more, and for a moment his silver eyes dimmed. Then the world went silent again. The wind carried nothing but ash. Deadwood Gulch was gone, replaced by an endless twilight plain, scorched and hollow. The train itself had vanished, or perhaps it had never truly existed. Yet Maggie Boone stood there, framed in the dim amber glow, her red shawl torn, face pale, but her eyes alive with a fire the living seldom carried. Brad Monroe was gone. Phil Baldwin was gone. Even Rodney Jenkins. He had vanished somewhere in the furnace below, leaving nothing but a scorched badge behind. Maggie's voice was soft, almost a whisper, but it carried across the void. "You shouldn't be here." A shadow moved behind her. The ghost rider appeared once again, riding slowly, spurs jingling with each spectral step. But this time, he was not hostile. His silver eyes focused entirely on Maggie. "You're the last one," he said. "The debt ends with her." Maggie stepped forward. "I'm not alive. I've been dead since the collapse." "You've lingered," the rider said, "waiting for someone to remember, someone to confess." "You were wronged, Maggie Boone. They buried you alive with the rest, and no one accounted for it." Maggie's lips trembled. I thought I would never see the living again. I didn't want vengeance, not truly, but they need to know. The world must remember." The rider dismounted, walking toward her. Sparks hissed beneath his boots as the plane shivered. He placed a skeletal hand on her shoulder. "Then speak, and free the line." "The midnight train rides no more." Maggie raised her voice, echoing across the twilight plains. "Hear me! Hear the story of Deadwood Gulch. Hear the miners Silas Boone led, trapped and betrayed. Hear of greed, of deceit, and of blood paid in silence. Hear the truth." Her words seemed to ripple outward, carrying the weight of every soul buried in the mines. The wind answered, rising into a howl, sweeping across the barren land. The rider's eyes softened. The debt is seen. The debt is known. Maggie's form shimmered, beginning to dissolve into particles of silver light. "Will they rest now?" The rider nodded. "Only when remembered." She smiled faintly, her last words a whisper. "Then let them ride in peace." And with that, the glow of her spirit merged with the rider's silver eyes. The spurs jingled one last time. The Ghost Rider kicked his spectral horse into motion, galloping across the twilight plains. The sound faded into silence, leaving nothing behind but a faint echo. Chink, chink, chink. Rodney Jenkins' badge, now cool to the touch, lay on the ground. A faint breeze stirred it as if brushing against unseen hands. The plain seemed to breathe, the last remnants of fire and shadow fading into an eerie calm. The line of Deadwood Gulch, the furnace, the train, all gone, yet every pulse of the land remembered the tale. Maggie Boone was gone, the rider was gone, and yet, for those who listened closely on quiet nights, the faint jingle of Silver Spurs could still be heard in the distance, reminding the world that some debts are eternal. Brad, Phil, Rodney, all gone, yet Maggie's story remained, carried by the wind, whispered across the plains and into the memory of every traveler who dared approach the forsaken rails. The last passenger was gone, leaving the midnight train's tale as a warning. Some debts cannot be outrun. Some ghosts never stop riding. Years passed and the land healed, or at least it tried to. Deadwood Gulch became a memory, whispered by old prospectors and forgotten in the dusty pages of ledger books. Railroads expanded, towns grew, and children laughed where screams had once echoed. Yet some things never die. On a cold November night, under a moonless sky, a boy named Eli Monroe wandered near the abandoned tracks that once led to Deadwood Gulch. He was the son of Brad Monroe, though he had grown up believing his father had simply disappeared, lost to some unremarkable accident. Eli's boots crunched on the gravel as the wind picked up, carrying a strange metallic chime. Chink, 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 chink. He froze. The sound was faint but distinct, like the ringing of spurs in rhythm with a heartbeat. "Who's there?" he called. His father's stories, whispered long ago, flitted through his mind. Tales of the midnight train, the Ghost Rider, the Silver Spurs. From the shadows, a figure emerged, not entirely human, not entirely phantom. The silhouette was tall, hat pulled low, coat trailing like smoke. The silver spurs glinted in the pale moonlight. Eli swallowed hard. "Dad?" The figure didn't answer. He dismounted slowly, boots thudding against the gravel. In his eyes glimmered a faint light, not of life, not of death, but of memory and vengeance intertwined. The wind carried whispers of names long forgotten. Rodney Jenkins, Phil Baldwin, Maggie Boone, Brad Monroe. Every name rolled over Eli's tongue like a warning. The Ghost Rider lifted a hand, pointing down the tracks that disappeared into shadow. A single silver spur clinked against the ground, resting at Eli's feet. A voice resonated from the rider. "Some debts are never forgiven. Some sins ride on, carried by blood and silence. You are the next, if you forget." Eli trembled, realizing the weight of inheritance. He wasn't just a boy wandering the rails, he was a link in the chain. The past had not released its grip. The spirits of Deadwood Gulch demanded remembrance, vigilance, and perhaps justice. The silver spurs jingled again, closer, louder. Eli looked up to see the ghostly train materializing from the mist, a phantom engine with flames for smoke, and spectral figures staring from the windows. He knew in that instant that the midnight train would ride again. The legend would continue, as long as the living dared to forget the debts of the dead. Eli knelt, picking up the silver spur, gripping it tightly. The wind whispered secrets only the old souls knew. And somewhere far away, the faint echo of hooves and spurs resounded across the plains. Chink, chink, chink. The story of Deadwood Gulch had ended, but the story of the Ghost Rider, the one who collected debts in silver, fire, and shadow, had just begun anew. And on nights when the moon hides behind storm clouds, some say, if you listen closely, you can hear the midnight train screaming through the Dakota plains, and the chilling jingle of silver spurs trailing behind. reminding the living that no wrong is ever truly buried. The plains were quiet once more, for now, but the wind carried a promise. The rider would return.